Ray Ollis was an insider and an outsider, a man who played the part of heroic knight, knowing he was neither a Christian warrior nor the equal of those around him. He was a man whose bravery was failure, who did not want to admit he craved fame and public success, yet who clearly felt he merited it. In disguise, then, Ray was the capable, roistering warrior who became a crippled creature, dying as he wrestled his aircraft with clumsy, burn-cramped hands. Ray describes his manic and his depressive selves, his capable and his incapable selves. Number 101 Squadron. This squadron wants very good gunners. In protecting the bomber force, we attract fighters onto ourselves. Any questions? Troop concentrations Le Havre. Troop concentrations Le Havre. Stuttgart, Arnhem, Calais, Karlsruhe. From Ludford Magna they flew northeast to the sea in less than 10 minutes, crossing the English Channel between Boulogne and Calais, both heavily defended. Some called it the Devil's Bridge. They were low enough to see the rows of wheat drawn like threads of straw across the field, and growing amongst it, a blaze of scarlet poppies. The setting sun caught each poppy with a touch of blood-red fire. Then a ripple of wind set the wheat heads dancing, and the whole field became a sea of flashing scarlet sequins. What is it? It's bloody bad farming. Dusk and the perpetual mist quickly hid Ludford, and England became more misty than a dream. Her fields were drifting haze, her towns misleading memory. Only this hurtling, roaring life in the air was real. The earth became a platform for guns, a launching ground for fighters. The flyers looked down with loathing at the wrinkled sea and hostile coast creeping towards them. Bright stars above, thick cloud below, and all around more than 600 aircraft, but nothing to be seen, not a damn thing. Were they on track? Avro Lancaster Q for Queenie hit occasional slipstreams, but the night that hid them from attack concealed their target too. Ahead, the leading bombers released their loads, bombing blind. A dull glow showed under a wide expanse of cloud, and the night went wild with flak. Queenie lurched from a nearby blast wave. Hyde dropped the nose a few degrees. A shallow dive through the target would get them clear of danger faster. With the following wind, they would be over the target at over 300 miles an hour. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, now! Counted the bomb aimer, pressing the tit. Bomb's gone! Queenie hurtled on in that shallow dive, the sky around and behind bubbling with molten shrapnel and dotted with burning, falling aircraft. Clear of the target, they turned for home. Corkscrew port, go! The pilot slammed the stick forward, jammed on left rudder and dropped the port wing. They lurched down, their navigator's instruments floating up off his desk. Up! The men were anchored to their seats. The navigation instruments crashed to the floor as the aircraft strained out of her dive. Tracer shells zipped under the starboard wing, and a new vibration shook her as two of Queenie's 3 machine gun turrets returned fire at over 100 bullets a second. Cordite fumes filled the fuselage, penetrating into their oxygen masks. Up starboard! Grinding around in tight turns to bring his guns to bear, the fighter followed for an instant. The Hun had the bomber in his sights. Dive starboard! A sickening empty lurch, and Queenie plunged, chasing its wingtip. The firing stopped. I think we've lost him, Skipper. My brain is wild, my breath comes quick, the blood is listening in my frame, and thronging shadows fast and thick fall on my overflowing eyes. The flak started. Light stuff spraying the skies above with a dazzling pattern of crisscrossing tracer in a dainty spiralling pattern of light. The flyers, glad of such paltry opposition, watched the vivid streaking lights. Then the ground below erupted in a chain of great explosions. 9 blasts in a straight line, 8 big, 1 very big. Queenie rocked as the shockwaves hit her. 8,000-pounders and 1 4,000-pound cookie. The lank who'd dropped the bomb load early turned from the bomber stream with both port engines ablaze, struggling to maintain height, flying back alone through the tracer. The flak faded behind and the bombers quickly covered the miles to the target. Skipper to gunners, see any combats? Nothing, Skip. Nobody liked to tempt fate by speaking his mind, but everyone thought the same thing. There should be more fighters out on a bright night like this. The bomber stream was well concentrated. They found all their turning points. The miles sped past. Karlsruhe was at hand. 5 minutes to time on target. The flak came up, dead ahead. I can see it! Wizard! Left, Skipper! Steady! The attack opened dead on time. The sky was filling with flak, but the flyers, intent only on this vulnerable target, were not diverted. Right a bit. Steady. Steady. Right. Steady. The first bombs fell on the factory. Bill was hard-pressed to concentrate on the factory, not the explosions. Left. Too much. Right a bit. Steady. Steady. Time shrunk over the target. It was not a human spectacle. The city was red as blood, cross-hatched with black streaks, sometimes blotted out by a deluge of flame. Towering spirals of smoke rose like huge rocky outcrops. We were warriors, experiencing the same grim satisfaction of a well-struck blade slicing open an opponent's life. Steady. Steady. Bombs away! Queenie shuddered as her 9 heavy weights dropped away one after the other, lurching upwards as her sudden lightness gave her extra lift. The attack had been perfect, every bomb load hitting its mark. String after string of close-knit explosions sprinkled across the wretched city. The flak became erratic. Fires started and spread as hurtling explosions flung burning masonry high and wide. Absolutely bang on. Wizard prang! Poor bastards! Fuck their horrible luck! As they looked up from their bomb run, they smelled cordite in the smoke as they sailed upon a sky of liquid lightning, flashes and crashes surrounding them, flying in the tail of a comet. Queenie rocked and juddered in the grips of blast and counterblast from shells all around her. Pointless to evade. They were lighter now, faster, and straight ahead was the quickest way out. Those bombers crashing down around them, they'd already bombed. They'd finished their job. An aircrew justified their training and the cost of their aircraft if they flew 2 successful missions and were lost on their 3rd after they had bombed. Perhaps this attack had turned 1 or 2 of these crews from a loss into a profit. A reassuring tick on the credit side, and all for the price of only 7 telegrams. How reassuring for wives and mothers. They left the searchlights behind, burrowing into the night, diving for home. The rear gunner stared at the flaming mass behind that had been central Karlsruhe. We won't have to bomb there again. I bet they'll be glad to hear that. Halfway through a tour of 30 operations, the end is still distant. Trip by trip, the end comes closer, but it's too uncertain to be sure. Only when there is only 5, 4, 3 remaining trips do their minds dare consider the statistics of deliverance. Cologne, Dusseldorf, Bochum, Nordstern Synthetic Oil Factory, Gelsenkirchen, Oil Refinery, 1 Eichel, Nuremberg. They watched the fog swirling 4 miles below. Beneath it skulked Nuremberg, smug, safe. Then, like a torch beneath a muddy pond, a red-brown glow appeared. The dull red glow was joined by grey-green markers, and then some misty yellow. Bombs began to fall, and as the blasts rent jagged holes in the grey blanket, for an instant the vivid markers shone brilliantly through the fog. 600 bombers saw the markers, and every long black nose turned to attack. 600 bombers carrying 2,300 tons of bombs. Inside 60 seconds, the concentration of bombs on central Nuremberg had melted the fog away, and the blood-red cherry of a target clamoured for every eye's attention. From the heart of an uninviting mess, one choice morsel beckoned. Every bomber relished it. "Bomb's gone!" Queenie's lurch as her bombs fell was shaken with a staccato shudder, the smell of cordite pungent, frightening. Every man tensed, wondering if Queenie had been hit. Then, before they could think, "I got him! I got him!" "You got what?" "I got a Ju-88. He's blown up. He's on our port beam. On fire!" Hyde tipped Queenie up on her left wingtip. A tiny comet burnt below, falling quickly down. As they watched, the tiny spark vanished, and an instant later a mushy explosion bubbled up out of the fog north of Nuremberg. The attack was more than half over, but the inferno that was Nuremberg had melted the fog for miles around. Flames and explosions overlapped, inspiring each other in seething competition. Nuremberg was the birth of a gaseous world whirling through fog-filled space. And still bombs rained down, cascading fuel to stoke the flames of hell itself, nearly 5 tons per second. Never before had they known such large-scale success. Targets had been hit before, hit hard, even wiped out, with devastating accuracy. Tonight, they had plastered an entire factory area. Rotterdam, London, Coventry were avenged and more against vital military targets, not useless, helpless civilians. Synthetic oil factory, Dortmund, Freiburg, Neuss. Truck factories and military barracks, Ulm. German troops, St. Vith, Merseburg, Duisburg. Their bomb doors were closing when a sparkling triangle of shells surrounded them. There was a gritty, crackling noise above the roar of engines, then 2 distinct thumps. V for Victor shuddered as a blast wave caught the empty, open bomb bays and sent the aircraft reeling up to heaven, her vitals filled with smoke and stench. Fire struck into Hyde's thighs, and as shrapnel bit his buttocks, his body lifted, flinging his feet from the rudder bars, wrenching the control column from his hands. He made no sound. His mouth, eyes, and hands were clenched in pain. Then his harness pulled him back into his seat, and once more he was flying Victor, off trim and straining up to the stars. For a moment he was numb. It had felt as though a hard, flat bat had whacked him. Anti-aircraft shrapnel is red hot, burns as much as it gouges. His flesh and bones and nerves clamoured with the agony of it. But Hyde saw a task and set about it. Victor must be flown. What blood he had lost would be but little compared to that which he would bring home. The controls were sloppy, the trim rough. Flying surfaces were shredded, and there was a great hole in the nose where cloud and cold gushed in. Hyde called the crew. No one else was hurt. Bill was getting wet, Mags could smell petrol, some flak came through Vince's desk, Crink's oxygen pipe was severed. The draft through the nose was freezing the gunners, but their guns were all right. Nobody thought to ask the skipper how he was. After all, Victor still flew. His legs and thighs performed the little tasks he set them, caused him no special pain, but he noticed he was sitting in warm, sticky ooze. Minds imagined gaping wounds and gushing blood where baby cuts and little trickles might exist. He thrust these worries aside, told himself his wounds were slight and not to be considered, then gave his full attention to his work. The night whirled, tossing them like a leaf. Their throttles were open, straining against the storm. Hyde checked his petrol, his watch, cast a troubled glance over his shoulder, looking for the dawn. Finally! On the Ludford flight path, Victor sank gently into the fog, and Hyde felt himself floating up, up, up. His spirit could not be goaded by this passive fog. He longed for turmoil again. This nothingness was a vacuum, void of life. He yearned to plunge again into the wild west wind, to float and whirl and fly with it. Oh, lift me as a wave, a leaf, a cloud. I fall upon the thorns of life. I bleed. Victor struck, mushing down on her belly into soft meadow. They were down, alive. They were lucky. 2 men carried the unconscious Hyde away, lay him in a ditch, looking down upon him in horror. His face and hands were gone. Those strong, capable hands his crew had trusted so much. His broad forehead and the powerful jaw were gore and bone, blackened with smoke, his face ghastly with the grin of white bared teeth, and his sightless, lidless eyes stared up at them. Saarbrücken on the Siegfried line, Emmerich, Duisburg, Wilhelmshaven, Stuttgart, Essen. This fiend, whose ghastly presence ever beside thee, like thy shadow, hangs. At first he was too absorbed with extricating the rear gunner from the fire to look at Smith himself. The mangled, burning man turned his face to Vincent, and this sight made him ill. Eyeballs burst and dribbling, inch-wide nostrils running red-brown blood, a shapeless, lipless hole that tried to speak, the mangled foot crushed in red-hot guns, the stump bubbling as it bled and burned, the reek of burning flesh. The writhing body sickened him, and the pain-filled swaying of the shapeless face in slow arcs of agony. Smith would never survive. Vincent stepped back from the turret. Beside the rear exit, clipped in its bracket, was the emergency axe. Vincent took it down. He stepped back into the fire. Though his heart was racing, his brain was as clear and hard as a diamond. He had never been more sure of the rightness of a thing. With the axe in both hands, Vincent raised it and chopped powerfully into Smith's skull. Chemnitz, Dessau, Essen, oil refinery, Lutzendorf, Operation Manna, Kiel, Admiral Scheer, Admiral Hipper, and the Emden. Berlin. Mens agitat molem, mind over matter. There was an intensity in the way Vincent drank and ordered another. He wasn't drinking for pleasure. He wasn't even drinking to forget, but to help him remember, to intensify his misery. The grim, determined misery of the guilt of surviving, like you were the only one. Out of the hundreds of men you'd known, the guilt which drove men to apply for Pathfinders with their 45 ops, or volunteer for ops again and again to atone for the dreadful, indecent sin of living while their comrades died, often in flames. Yes, I've killed babies, but I've never seen their broken little bodies. I've never killed them with my own hands. Bombing is different. Bombing is civilized. How many bomber crews with hundreds of women and children to their credit could take a child and kill it with their own hands? Ladies and gentlemen, these men, the wild west wind of Bomber Command, were they the hollow men who came to forget that they fought for decency because they had themselves become indecent, corrupt? The common truth defies our conceit, proclaiming that self-belief is the answer, that self-determinism will always allow us to win, while, yes, we may or may not descend into corruption. We can break, and indeed, more often than not, we do. And British civilization did become corrupt. Though the British used huge flamethrowers in World War I, it was a German who invented it and nurtured it to fruition in 1901. When the Germans bombed England, the first country to bomb another country's cities in both world wars, their tactics failed. Understandably furious, the British always learned by their mistakes, turning the Germans' ingenious capacity to create war from peace back upon them. It was their own fault. They started it. They started it. And it was not just bad, but indecently bad, evil almost beyond imagining. The trouble with evil is that, Like Pandora's box, once the evil has been seen, we become accustomed to it. When Prometheus stole fire from the gods and gave it to man, he was punished with everlasting pain in his liver. To unbind Prometheus was to release humanity from its servitude of pain, the perpetration of evil. I could lie down like a tired child and weep away the life of care which I have borne and yet must bear, till death like sleep might steal on me and I might feel in the warm air my cheek grow cold and hear the sea.